Welcome back. All right, so goaltending. As we get ready for training camp, of course, this week, and then preseason games start next weekend, we're going to have some goaltending battles to watch. Backup jobs are up for grabs here. And so I wanted to highlight teams that I feel like we don't know yet who the backup's going to be. We can have a good idea who the backup's going to be. I didn't include the Colorado situation because apparently Francouz might be back near the start of the season, so I would think a Noonan probably ends up being your backup until Francouz is good to go. I still, with Francouz's track record of getting hurt, I would not be surprised if Colorado grabs themselves some insurance. But anyways, that being said, I wanted to do this. Now, I organized this by who's in the most cap trouble. So from the most cap trouble, which would be Toronto, to Anaheim, who do not have a cap problem. So in Toronto, it's going to be interesting because you've got Wall. I have seen a lot of Leaf fans very supportive of Wall. He's 25 years of age. If he's going to make it to the NHL, this is probably the year. But they signed Martin Jones. Now, Jones is 33. If Jones doesn't get the job, maybe instead of putting him on waivers, they look around and see if anybody wants him in net. I would think that there's some backup jobs that might be available that he would be good for. But that being said, do you keep Jones? Do you keep Wall? Do you keep three? And there might be teams on this board that keep three. Carolina stands out as a team that I think probably keeps three. But we'll see who wins that job in Toronto. In Tampa Bay, it's a little bit different. So you've got Johansson, who's 27 years of age, probably his net. Alnefeld's 22. He's kind of sort of the next guy and may very well be at some point the backup. Johansson's numbers at the NHL level last year were good. Not a lot of experience, though, last season anyways. And so we'll see if he does end up being the backup for Vasilevsky. It feels like if there's a team that might sign Halak, it feels like Tampa Bay would make the most sense right now. But we'll see. And then in Vancouver, you have some uncertainty too. So Silovs is 22. May very well be ready. Had played well in Abbotsford, played well in Vancouver when called upon. And then there's Spencer Martin. Now, there are those who will say that Spencer Martin would be fine as the backup. My concern would simply be, so if Demko gets hurt, and we know he can, I don't know that the Canucks have a goaltender that I would be entirely comfortable with being the goaltender for, an extended period of time of 3, 4, or 5 weeks. Because the West is going to be, both conferences are going to be tough to get above the playoff line, and if you have a really rough 3 weeks, that could very well be the end of the season. So we'll see what Vancouver does, and if that is, in fact, the battle we see. I think Silovs probably gets a shot at the backup job. Montreal's going to be interesting. So Casey DeSmith, there have been rumors for weeks that Casey DeSmith's not going to be a Montreal Canadian for long. They're going to trade him. He's going to end up being out of town. He's still there. So DeSmith's still there. He's 32. Allen is 33. I don't have Montembeault on the board because Montreal clearly is kind of gung-ho on Montembeault. But is Allen or DeSmith going to be the backup? And whoever loses out and isn't the backup, do we see a trade, or is DeSmith on his way somewhere else this week? So when we get into training camps, maybe there's a team, maybe a Tampa Bay says we're not all that happy with our choices right now, and then they look out and maybe a DeSmith is there as a possibility, right? And then we get to the Calgary Flames. So the Flames are in an interesting position where Dustin Wolf had a great year in the AHL. He's 22 years of age. Is he ready, right? And if you believe he is, well, Vladar, 26 years of age, coming off of a down year, but Vladar is not going to clear waivers to go down to the AHL. So you're stuck in a bit of a situation here if you're Calgary. Wolf, of course, does not require waivers to be sent down, and that will be an argument for a lot of the goaltenders on the board. Well, you don't need waivers for Silovs or Alnefelt, so clearly you send them down. And so we'll see if that is, in fact, the case. For teams that need to make the playoffs, it is important to keep the best players around, regardless of their standing and regardless of any waiver concerns you might have. You want to ice the best team on opening night. So we'll see what Calgary does, especially if Wolf has a really good preseason, right? LA, I still think this is an interesting one, and I know that people will give Copley the edge, and I get why, and I agree. Copley has the edge for the backup job. He and David Rittich are both 31 years of age. Rittich also has a solid resume as a backup goaltender in the National Hockey League, and I think Rittich would probably clear waivers if they keep Copley and they waive Rittich, but we'll see how that goes down, right? Does Copley win that job as the backup? Talbot, you got to think, is going to be the starter. That's why I don't have Talbot on the board here. But yeah, Copley versus Riddick could be fun to watch. Philadelphia, there's three. There's three goaltenders here that I think are worthy of looking at. First off, there's Peterson. Now, he's 28. His contract is an issue. However, for Philadelphia, if he's the best goaltender, then you give him the backup job, right? So Carter Hart's not on the board because he's clearly the starter. If Peterson can have that bounce back year for Philly, they could win some games. But Peterson's had 2 down years now in a row. So we'll see. Sandstrom, 26 years of age. Ersson is there as well at 23. Clearly, Tortorella for a while there really trusted Ersson and gave him a bunch of games. We'll see whether or not Ersson ends up beating out both of them for that backup job. Philadelphia not expected to win a lot of games, but it doesn't mean that Tortorella is just going to play guys that aren't necessarily going to win. His job is to win and try to make things a little bit less comfortable for Danny Briere. Now, in Carolina, they're likely to carry 3 goaltenders. Ronta's 34, Kochetkov is 24. Kochetkov is signed to a $2 million a year deal. Ronta being brought back, again, still a surprise to me a little bit. I figured Ronta or Anderson, but they brought both back. Well, it's Freddie's net, right? So does Kochetkov get that backup job and Ronta's the healthy scratch, the guy who's out in, watching from above, or does it go the other way around? And if Carolina does decide Kochetkov's the guy, could there be a trade offer for Ranta that Don Waddell looks at and says, you know what? We kind of have to do this. So we'll see. And I'm not saying that does happen, but you don't want your 34-year-old goaltender being in number 3 and just not getting the ice time and not getting the opportunity. So we'll see if Kochetkov gives Don Waddell a reason to be concerned going into the season, or at the very least, a little bit flustered that, well, clearly Kochetkov's the guy, and he and Freddie Anderson, and what are we going to do with Ranta, right? Keeping in mind that Ranta and Anderson do get injured, and so that might be part of the reason, too, why you want to have all 3 guys. For Seattle, Joey Decord's 27. I think with the way he played for the Firebirds last season and in the playoffs, I think he has earned the right to be the backup, but Drieger does have a good contract. Good for Drieger, right? Is $4.5 million a year. This is the final year of that contract. He's 29 years of age. In training camp, can Drieger edge Decord, or is Drieger destined to be buried in the minors? And if you're Ron Francis and you're looking at this battle, if they're close to one another, Drieger, it's much easier to get through waivers. Over half the league cannot afford to pick up Drieger on waivers, and the ones that have the cap space probably not likely to pick up Drieger. And if they do, well, then you've got that money off your books, and then you might be able to go out and sign somebody else. So for Seattle, it's probably Decord's job, but we'll see if Drieger makes things more difficult for Ron Francis. Detroit, I do think it's Reimer's backup job. He's 35 years of age. The way Lyon played late last season and into the playoffs, he's age 30. I don't think Lyon ends up getting that job, but I felt like if I didn't put Reimer versus Lyon on the board, people would be mentioning it in the comments a lot. So I figured, all right, I'll throw that up there. I think that Reimer would have to have a disastrous preseason to not get one of the top 2 jobs in Detroit. I think it'll be Husso and Reimer, and then we'll see what that tandem can do. Reimer had an up-and-down season last year, but that was with San Jose, a team that was not very good. So you might be able to just push that to the side and say, well, Reimer should bounce back in Detroit. But you look and see that he's 35, and then there's some question marks there as well, right? Buffalo, 2 guys, first or last name starts with L. They're both young goaltenders. Luukkonen, 24 years of age. Felt like he took a bit of a step back last season. And, of course, Devin Levi, 21 years of age, and seen as a star for the Buffalo Sabres. So what I'm going to do this as well, because it does feel like we might see a 3-way battle. I think Comrie's 32, but Luukkonen and Levi, the reason that I didn't have Comrie up, I need to explain this. I don't think they're going to go with 2 young, inexperienced goaltenders as their tandem. I think if Comrie's still here, then Comrie has to be one of the top 2 goaltenders just from an experience standpoint. And again, you don't want to be throwing either of these goaltenders necessarily to the Wolves. While Buffalo could very well be a playoff team this year, do you trust 2 young goaltenders, or do you go with the veteran young goalie? So that's why I didn't have Comrie on the board. I've added Comrie now. for that whole discussion that we can all have about this. But I don't know if you're seeing Buffalo in the playoffs if Luukkonen and Levi is your tandem. And that's why for rumor sites right now, they might be saying, hey, Buffalo's going to be after a goaltender. Buffalo's in on a goaltender because they stand out as a team that could potentially flip Luukkonen in exchange for a veteran goaltender who would be seen as a safer bet to get them into the playoffs, right? Obviously, Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg is the one that everybody's going to be after. He's not available as of yet that I've heard. So, yeah, Luukkonen and Levi, or do you go with Comrie? I think Levi has the inside track on the backup job. I think, or even yes, I will agree, starter job over Comrie. Fine, we can go there too. He doesn't have a lot of games in the NHL yet, but he's been impressive with what he's played. So, Buffalo will be an interesting one because expectations have been raised this year. Chicago. You have two 24-year-old goaltenders that I think are going to fight it out. You have Stauber, 24 years of age, played well. Soderblom, it doesn't matter. 24. I've heard it both ways. And yeah, I was watching the Detroit-Toronto feed of the Prospects game today, and they're saying Soderblom. But I've heard Soderblom for Arvid Soderblom here, the goaltender. So they're brothers, so I don't know. Tell them to figure it out. But yeah, they're 24 years of age, both of these goalies. Both of them had good stretches, bad stretches. I think Soderblom probably has the inside track on that backup job because Comesso is 21 years of age. You want him to play in Rockford. You want him to get games in, and you know this year in Chicago is probably going to be pretty rough. So you don't want to take your young prized goaltender and throw him to the Wolves. So with apologies to the two 24-year-olds ahead of him on the board here, one of them's probably going to get thrown to the Wolves as the backup for Mrazek. Does Mrazek finish the season in Chicago? Do they make other changes in net? We'll see. And then finally, the Anaheim Ducks. You have Dostal, you have Stalock. Now, for me, I think that Dostal is the future in Anaheim. I think he's going to be the guy. Stalock, 36 years of age, probably gets waived and sent down, which is too bad because I think Stalock had a good year in Chicago. But every year we see goaltenders who put up half-decent stats, and yet they end up in situations where they get sent down. They end up in the minors. Hudobin, who now is, of course, playing overseas, finishing up his NHL career this past season, is a good example of a goaltender that could be very good, backup, and then end up in the AHL for a couple years, and then back in the NHL and all of that. So Stalock's kind of followed that pattern as well. And I do think for Anaheim, if they waive Stalock, there might be a team that might be willing to pick him up. I could see Vancouver picking up Stalock and going, cool, because then you'd have Silovs and Martin as your tandem in Abbotsford, and I think that would be solid, right? So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts. Which goalies do you think win the backup jobs? I did not include every team because I think that'd be insane. And there are a lot of teams where I feel like the battery is set. Your starter and your backup are set. You're good to go. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.